स्वधर्मज्ञान वैराग्य साध्य भक्त्यैकगोचरः नारायण परं ब्रह्म गीता शास्त्रे समीरितः. It is through the observance of karma yoga, acquisition of right knowledge and cultivation of bhakti, one can discover the supreme reality. We have been relishing various chapters of the Gita, and we have assembled today to relish the 5th chapter of the Gita, Karma Sannyasa Yoga. In the first chapter of the Gita, we see Arjuna's Vishada, and therefore it is titled Arjuna Vishada Yoga. In the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna elucidates Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya, knowledge of the Atman, and Yoga, standing for Karma Yoga. And in the second chapter, Krishna also talks about the prerequisite of Karma Yoga in order to practice Jnana Yoga, eventually to attain the goal of Atma Sakshatkara. So therefore, in the second chapter, Arjuna lays a framework as to how one can progress to attain self-realization by practicing Karma Yoga, which eventually becomes a prerequisite for the practice of Jnana Yoga, enabling one to attain the goal of Atma Sakshatkara. In the third chapter, titled Karma Yoga, Krishna then expands on the principle of Karma Yoga. And he continues his exposition on Karma Yoga in the fourth chapter, where he also talks about the primacy and significance of the knowledge aspect of action and the significance of knowledge, which becomes the foundation for every right action done for the practitioner of Karma Yoga. And in the third and fourth chapter, Krishna also talks about how Karma Yoga is self-sufficient for one to attain the goal of Atma Sakshatkar. Arjuna is now confused. No, thanks to Arjuna, he keeps getting confused quite often. Thanks to him, because of his confusion, he ends up asking all the questions on our behalf. Now, Arjuna's confusion is as follows. Krishna talks about a path that leads to the goal of Atma Sakshatkara, where he talks about Jnana Yoga to be practiced with a prerequisite of Karma Yoga. He places Jnana Yoga on a pedestal. And then he also then goes on to basically recommend to Arjuna that Karma Yoga by itself is sufficient for you, hey Arjuna, to attain the same goal. So now, hey Krishna, you talked about two paths now to reach the same goal, the path of Jnana, the path of Karma. Then I am confused. What is that which is right for me? So therefore, conclusively, decisively, I want an answer from you. Because Arjuna is still hopeful that Krishna would recommend Jnana Yoga, and therefore he can renounce the world and then he can walk away from the battlefield. No, Arjuna even now has that little hope, because Krishna did talk about sannyasa. There were two kinds of sannyasa that Krishna talked about. Sannyasa in the sense of renouncing the world, and sannyasa in terms of karma sannyasa. Remain engaged with the world and you can still be a sannyasi, Krishna says. Now, Arjuna is still preferring the first sannyasa, renouncing the world, because he is still wanting to walk away from the battlefield. Therefore, he is now asking Krishna this question, hey Krishna, I want a decisive answer from you. You have to now recommend whether Karma Yoga is appropriate or Jnana Yoga is appropriate. It is in this context that in the 5th chapter, Krishna highlights the efficacy of Karma Yoga and the ease of practice of Karma Yoga and the quicker benefit that one would obtain by practicing Karma Yoga. He compares Jnana Yoga to Karma Yoga and says, hey Arjuna, while both the paths are equally worthy, for majority, including you, Arjuna, I recommend the path of Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is self-sufficient to enable you attain the goal of Atma Sakshatkara, the goal of self-realization. Now, what is self-realization? We keep talking about self-realization, and every time we talk about self-realization, we still are not very clear. Self-realization, simply put, is alignment of our self-image with our true nature. We all have our own self-image, our own conception of who we are. So when we say self-realization, it is essentially aligning who we think we are with who we actually are. Because in the way we operate in our life and living, who we think we are is not who we really are. This is one of the root causes of all the ills in samsara. Because who we think we are, our conception of who we are, is everything to do with the world and the way the world defines us. Everything to do with our externals, based on our own identification with our body, mind and our intellect. So therefore our conception, our self-image, whatever we think we are, is not what we are. So when our Shastras talk about self-realization, it is this progressive alignment of our self-image with who we really are. Who we really are, our true essence, the indwelling spiritual essence. That understanding the distinction and difference from our own body, our own mind, our own intellect. And therefore, self-realization is that awareness. Now, how do we gain that self-realization? When the mind begins to act more like a good mirror and not just a window, then we start gaining self-realization. Our mind has two functions primarily. It is our window to the world. The mind is our window to our world. Our consciousness uses the mind as an instrument to engage with the world. And together with the senses, we engage with the world, and the mind is the intermediate instrument through which we engage with the world. So therefore, for all practical purposes, it's the window. Unfortunately, it is a window which has several screens, and many times we are also not sure if what the mind is presenting to us is the reality. Apart from being a window, the mind also has another very important function. The mind also has to function as a mirror. The mind is supposed to reflect who we are. Because it is only through the mind that we can not only engage with the outer world, we can also engage with our own inner world. The mind has to reflect the self within the indwelling Atman. Unfortunately, the mind does not play the role of an ideal mirror. That is the reason why there is a misalignment between who we think we are and who we are. Because who we think we are is a projection in the mind. Our self-image It's a collection of various images, which is also based on the impressions that we have accumulated in the mind over several lifetimes. And it is also dependent on the way the world sees us. And therefore, the self-image that is there in our mind is a very bad reflection of who we truly are. Imagine we have a mirror at home and we keep looking at it, and every time we look at it, it presents a crooked picture of who we are. We don't get to see. Imagine we have been using a mirror at home, which has not been functioning at all. And the only way we can get to know ourselves is through a mirror. And only when we eventually get to see a good mirror which truly reflects us, we will really see who we are. This is how the mirror plays various kinds of tricks on us, disempowering us. And therefore, self-realization is a process where the mind is cleansed. The layers and layers of dirt, the vasanas that are accumulated over multiple lifetimes, the various layers of dirt have to be cleansed. This is the process of purification. And also the mind has to become calm, still, serene, so that it can truly and faithfully reflect. That's why many a times the example is given of a lake. When there are waves in the lake, the reflection is very wavy. If we need a true reflection, the wave has to be, the lake has to be still. Only in a still lake we get to see the true reflection. Similarly, the mind has the waves, the disturbances, the agitations, the anxieties in the mind have to slowly fade. The mind has to become calm with no agitations, and only then it can function as a good mirror. So therefore, the whole process of karma yoga that Gita teaches is the process of purifying this mind, removing the various layers and layers of dirt that has accumulated on the mind, making the mind clean, calm, serene, so that yes, it has to function as a good window to the world, but it also has to function as a faithful mirror too. And when the mirror is faithful, then we get to see, then our self-image, our conception of what we think we are aligns exactly with who we are. Then we rise above our bodily identification. We recognize we are beyond our body. We are the indwelling Atman and not the body. So Krishna therefore recommends, hey Arjuna, Karma Yoga is self-sufficient. By practicing Karma Yoga, you can continue to move on the path of self-realization and attain the goal of Atma Sakshatkara. In this chapter, Krishna basically touches on few important topics. The first topic, of course, the theme of the chapter is demonstrating the significance of Karma Yoga, the efficacy of Karma Yoga, how Karma Yoga can bring in results faster. The result being Atma Sakshatkara, the ease of doing Karma Yoga. This is one theme of this chapter. Krishna also talks about one of the important ingredients in the performance of Karma Yoga, which is called Akartritva, non-doership. This is the second theme of this chapter. One of the foundational pillars of Karma Yoga is this principle of Akartritva, Akartritva. Kartritva means doership, Akartritva, non-doership. The third theme in this chapter is the theme of the nature of the Atman versus the action performed by the embodied soul, and the emergence of the knowledge out of performance of Karma Yoga. And then the fourth theme is the principle of Samatva, Samadarshana. Now let us look at the principle of akartrutva that Krishna talks about. Now, this principle of akartrutva, Krishna continues to talk throughout the Gita. It's so very foundational to the performance of Karma Yoga. Naiva kinchit karomiti karto yukto manyeta tattvavit. Yukto manyeta tattvavit, he says. Pashyan sparshan shrinvan jigran ashnan gachan swapan swashan. Krishna talks about various activities that are performed by the jnanendriyas and the karmendriyas and the panchapranas. Pralapan, Vishajan, Grinnan, Unmishan, Nimishan, api Indriyan, Indriyarteshu, Vartanta iti dharayan. Krishna talks about how the body works. If we really observe the way our body, the activities of our body, most of the bodily activities are programmed. The physical and the physiological activities of the body are all programmed. The body is mechanical. And many of these actions are done unconsciously. I don't expend any effort to see. The eye sees automatically. Pashyan, Shrinvan, the listening, seeing, tasting, touching, walking, sleeping, breathing. Any activity that we say, it could be the activities of jnanendriyas, it could be, which are the organs of perception, karmendriyas, organs of action. It could be any activities to do with the panchapranas, breathing. No, I don't expend any effort to breathe. The breathing happens without any effort automatically. The body is programmed to do various activities automatically. Indriyan indriyarteshu vartanta iti dharayan. Now the indwelling Atman has none of these actions but for its association with the body. All these actions are acquired by the Atman because it has the association with a particular body. The nature of these actions changes depending on the nature of the body. The same Atman in a human being does one kind of action, in an animal ends up doing different kinds of action. The nature of the body determines the type of actions, and even within the body, all the sense organs are designed by default to engage with the world. All the indriyas are designed by default to engage with the world, to see, to listen. Every external stimuli, when it is received, automatically when an external stimuli is received, it triggers a physical reaction. The body first starts to react physically. There is a physical reaction to an external stimuli that is received. Then there is an emotional activation of a desire for that object. I see a laddu. Now that's an external stimulus. Now when I see the laddu, automatically, without my intention, my tongue starts to water. Now that is something which is mechanical. It's programmed. It happens to everyone. Of course, if somebody doesn't like laddu, it's a different story. I'm just taking an example. So when I see something which I like, now everything starts with a physical reaction. Indriyan indriyarteshu. It is how it meant to be. A healthy, active human being physically is programmed to react to external stimuli. So I see a laddu, my tongue waters. Step 1, physical reaction. Step 2, emotional activation of a desire. Now I have a desire to eat laddu. Step 2, there is an emotional activation of a desire because I already have a desire. Now that I've seen the laddu, my desire inside is activated now. Now I must now take the laddu and eat it. This then will lead to the third step of conscious intention. Yes, I will now take the laddu and eat it. So a physical reaction. So when we look at the inner world, we have when we body, mind and intellect, the conscious, the intention many a times gets rolled in. There is no space between the physical reaction, the emotional activation of the desire and the intention, which means many a times we are programmed to even intend. Unconsciously we get dragged into indulgence. This distance between the physical reaction, the emotional activation and the intention collapses, and most often we operate where unconsciously we are indulging. Indriyan indriyarteshu. Now Krishna says there is a choice here to bring a distance between the physical reaction, the emotional activation and my intention. Now I have the desire for laddu, but today is Ekadashi, so I can intend to say no. I can stop myself from eating it. I can bring a distance. But if my will is weak, I will end up compromising and saying it's okay, it's Krishna Prasad, it's fine. Or I will give any other reason. So, realizing that Indriyan indriyarteshu vartanta iti dharayan, Krishna says, one needs to now realize that many of my actions or most of my actions are acquired by me. The Atman acquires his action. The sage Parashara gives a beautiful example in Vishnu Purana. He says, water whose property is to be cool acquires heat when it is put in a vessel and on fire. Now, when it starts to boil, when it acquires heat, heat is an acquired quality of water, not its natural quality. Similarly, the Atman acquires Kartrutva, doership, when it is in association with the body. So therefore, it ends up doing different kinds of activities, and Akartrutva Anusandhana, non-doership, is essentially to ascribe doership to the indriyas. It is because of my sense organs, it is because of the karmendriyas and the jnanendriyas I am indulging in performing actions. Therefore, Akartrutva Anusandhana is ascribing doership to them. When you ascribe doership to the body and to the indriyas, then the Atman realizes that it is through this non-doership that the impressions that can be accumulated in the mind can be stopped. When we start to realize it is not my action, it is that the mindness gets weakened, and that is how to stop accumulating more and more impressions in the mind. So Akartrutva therefore is so very foundational. How can this Akartrutva be practiced? Krishna says, Brahmanyadaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti aha lipyatena sapapena padmapatra ivambhasa. Padmapatra ivambhasa. Krishna beautifully gives the example of the lotus leaf. Padmapatra ivambhasa. The example of a lotus leaf is so very significant. It is basically saying, we all have heard about this analogy. You have to be like water on the lotus leaf, not stick. Water does not stick to it, does not stay. Now, also the beauty of the lotus leaf is it is in muddy water, but it is not contaminated. It remains, the water does not wet it, mud does not contaminate it. It remains detached from all the contaminations of the muddy water. So, remaining engaged in the world by performing karma yoga, one can also stay detached from the world, like Padmapatra Vimambhasa. Brahmanyevadi karman. Brahma here basically saying ascribing actions to all the organs of the body. Sangam tyaktva karoti yaha. Sangam tyaktva karoti yaha. Lipyatena sapapena. Sangam tyaktva karoti, completely be detached from the results of the action, which Krishna has been highlighting right from the second chapter. Accept everything that comes without any struggle. Take responsibility, but don't defend, don't struggle against what ensues, what unfolds. And when that is done, lipyatena sapapena, then one stops accruing both punya karma and papa karma. And that is nishkama. When we stop accruing punya karma and papa karma, that is where the purification of the mind starts. So Krishna therefore says, look at karma yoga for what is the objective of your action should be. Why should we perform karma yoga? Every action, there is a reward. Now, are rewards important or not important? Krishna does not say rewards are not important. Krishna does not say reject the rewards. Krishna says rewards may come, but they should be byproduct. Every action has an external benefit and internal benefit. An action has to be done for the sake of internal benefit, and external benefit, which is the reward, the result, will become a byproduct of the action. And what is the internal benefit? The internal benefit is the mental purification. Internal benefit is the purification of the mind. Every action that is performed, if it can purify my mind, then that becomes a right action. And in that process, if external results come which are good, great, it's bonus. If they do not come, I am not disturbed. Then he says, using your mind, body and the intellect. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalair indriyairapi. Yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye, he says. We have to use the body, mind and intellect that is given to us and continue to perform actions. What? For what? Sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye, for the sake of purification. Now, some may say, this body is not working for me, so I will suppress my indriyas, I will repress my indriyas, which means I work against the body. This is exactly the opposite of I work for the body. No, these are two extremes. I work for the body or I work against the body. I work for the body, which means I just live my life for the sake of bodily gratification, completely giving in, programmed to essentially be driven in the direction of my desires and sense gratification. The other extreme is I start repressing, suppressing, which means I work against the body. Now Krishna is saying both are bad. Working for the body is not good. Working against the body is also counterproductive. So then what should one do? Work with the body. Don't work for the body or don't work against the body. Work with the body. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalair indriyairapi. Use the body that is given, the mind that is given, the intellect that is given, use them to perform right actions. It is like, if you take the analogy of a car, no, the body is like the car and the Atman is like the driver. Working for the body means essentially letting the car take us wherever it is programmed to go. Now, cars can be programmed and they can take us in any direction that we want. Imagine that a car is programmed to go in some direction which is against where we want to go. Working for the body is essentially letting the car take us wherever it is programmed to go. Working against the body is to drive the car in the reverse direction. Working with the body is to steer the car take control of the car and drive in the right direction towards the destination. And only when we take charge of the body, mind and intellect and put them to use. For what purpose? For the purpose of purification of the mind. Because every action that we can do can actually end up purifying our mind, and in that process, as the purification starts happening, the mind which is clouded, the layers of dirt that cover the mind, layer by layer gets cleansed, and slowly and steadily we get to start seeing the right reflection. Now, this is how, by performing karma yoga on the principle of akartrutva, over a period of time, the knowledge that emerges reveals our true nature. The knowledge that emerges reveals our true nature. So therefore, this becomes the next important theme of this chapter. The knowledge, the nature of the Atman vis-a-vis the action that is performed, and the emergence of jnana by performance of karma yoga. Now, the nature of the Atman vis-a-vis the action that is performed. The nature of the Atman is the same in every body. Every entity, the nature of the Atman is the same. But the actions are different, determined by two things: the type of the body and the individual karma, the individual vasanas that each one carries. So therefore, the nature of the Atman is the same, and this can be realized by continuously climbing up the ladder of knowledge. Krishna gives a beautiful ladder that we can climb. It's like going to upstairs. There is multiple floors, climb up the ladder, and then you go to the top floor, where that knowledge, reaching there, we can start to experience our own true nature, the nature of the Atman. Krishna gives a beautiful formula, a ladder. Tad buddhayaha, tadatmanaha, tannishtaha, tatparayanaha, kachanti apunaravattim, jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Tad buddhayaha, tadatmanaha, tannishtaha, tatparayanaha, kachanti apunaravattim. The moment one reaches that place, there is no coming back, which means one reaches that exalted state where one realizes one's true nature, and from there is no coming back. Now, how do we go there? He gives several steps. Step 1, one needs to have the determination, the steadfastness to be in the right direction in order to achieve that vision of the Atman. Step 2 is to take control of the mind. Step 3 is to ensure that the mind stays focused and we engage the mind in all the right activities that will take us towards the goal. Step 4 is to have that one overriding goal, which is to realize our true nature and be connected to the goal throughout the journey. Now, when we look at each of these steps, when Krishna says Tad Buddhayaha, it is essentially getting our direction right in the path that we are going on. Now, we all lead a lives where we pretend. We end up pretending. Why do I say that? Because we pretend who we are not. Every role that we play in our life, if that role that we play is not aligned to who we truly are, then we are pretending. We are not being ourselves. We are not being authentic, because whatever we do, it is only pretense. It is not aligned with our true nature. So therefore, Tad Buddhayaha, from pretending, Krishna says one should be pretending, which is get the direction in terms of going towards realizing essentially aligning our self-image with our self. Get the direction right. And how do we get the direction right? By taking control of the mind. The mind is like a recording studio, whether we realize it or not. It's a beautiful recording studio where it keeps recording everything wanted and unwanted, and it also faithfully stores everything recorded not in this lifetime, everything recorded in several lifetimes before. And it is a recording studio where the what is recorded gets played back at any time the mind wishes. We don't need to ask for it. Many times we all face a situation in a situation where we never expected. Suddenly the mind is playing something. We are in a nice place and suddenly there is a horror movie being played in the mind. The mind plays what it recorded at different times in different points, which means what? We need to first recognize that in this recording studio of the mind there are 3 important buttons which we completely ignore. What are the 3 important buttons? There is a play button, there is a record button, there is a pause button. There are all these 3 buttons. There is a pause button, which means we can use the pause button to pause whatever the mind is playing. It is not necessary that we are slaves to the mind, and if the mind has to play something, it has to complete what it has to. We have the capability to pause. The mind may start to run a thought, an unwanted thought at any given point in time. And recognizing that there is a pause button means stopping that unwanted thought then and there. We also have to recognize there is a record button, which means we can also choose to record what we think is right. If we don't choose the record button, the mind will anyway do its own recording. The mind is already doing by default lots of recording. Whether we like it or not, all the stimuli from the external world which goes inside is dutifully recorded, even without our involvement. But there is a record button and we can choose that record button, which means we have the capability to record the right messages, the right thoughts that can start filling the mind. Not only that, there is a play button, which means we can choose. There is a select option. We can actually choose the playlist and select what needs to be played in the mind. We are not at the mercy of the mind choosing its own playlist. If we do not exercise the option of choosing the play button, the mind will choose it for us. The mind will choose it. There are only 2 possibilities. Either we choose the playlist and push the play button, or the mind chooses what it wants to play from its own playlist. Then we are at its mercy. The first is to recognize that there are these 3 buttons, and when to use which button also is so very important. Tadbuddhayah stadhatmanaha, taking charge of the mind, control the mind and start to record the right. That is why Shrotavyaha, when we listen to Gita and when we get all those inspiring messages, it is very important that we immediately use the record button and record. But then what we record many a times gets faded out until and unless we recall. We have to constantly keep recalling. Listen to what is recorded, keep playing it again and again, and use the play button. And whenever there are challenges, whenever there are situations which are overwhelming, choose the play button and choose the playlist. All the good things that have gone into the mind would come back and be, when it's played, would help us face situations. And that is the only way that we can start to manage the mind and keep using the pause button all the time. All the time. If we don't use the pause button, we are at the mercy of the mind. Krishna, therefore, he is giving us a ladder here. Tad buddhayaha, tadatmanaha, tannishtaha. So, with that determination, with taking charge of the mind and then tadatma tanishtaha. Then one needs to fashion one's life and living accordingly. Lifestyle has to also be aligned to our goal of self-realization. It cannot be completely misaligned. We need to fashion our life and living. That is the reason why satsangs are so very important. That is the reason why pilgrimages are so very important. So that the way we fashion our life and living is conducive to keep recording more and more good stuff in the mind and taking us closer and closer in terms of cleaning the mind, purifying the mind, making the mind calm, so that the goal of self-realization gets closer and closer and closer. So the third step, tanishtaha, the karma yogi has to manage his life and living in such a way that it is conducive to staying on course. Because as it is, we have strong vasanas which will keep pulling us, keeping distracting us. If our lifestyle is not properly fashioned, then we give more reasons for us to be pulled away from this path. So tanishtaha, the karma yoga nishta is one who manages his lifestyle, brings balance to everything. Obviously, life needs to be wholesome. We need to take care of the body, mind, intellect. We need to also take care of the senses. So therefore, having fun is definitely a part of a wholesome life and living, but that does not mean one becomes a slave of sense pleasures. So Krishna in the Gita always talks of having a balance in everything, moderation in everything that we do, a lifestyle where everything is moderated, so that one stays on course towards the goal. Tat parayanaha. The parayana, the goal of Atma Sakshatkara, from where there is no coming back. Once one reaches that stage, there is no coming back. Nacha punaravartate, nacha punaravartate. Therefore, reaching that stage takes time. But when one reaches that state, start to experience one's own nature, then one will not really come back, come down. This is essentially elevating the consciousness. Most often we look at life as a problem-solving exercise. Typically, life is looked upon as solving one problem after the other. Essentially, there is a series of problems that keep coming, and therefore life is all about a continuous problem solving. Life is not about problem solving, because how many problems can we solve? And there are problems that are unsolvable in life, which are beyond our control. And therefore, if life becomes only a problem solving exercise, it's only a struggle, then what should life be? Life should be a consciousness elevating a journey, where everything that we do should be towards elevating our consciousness. Taking an analogy, yes, we have to do exercise, lift weights to make the body strong. But then, making the body strong is not the end in itself. Problem solving is like weightlifting. I do weightlifting every day and make my muscles strong, my body is strong. But then, what then? The body has become strong. What is the end goal? The strong body has to be used for some constructive purpose in life. So the end goal is not making the body strong. Similarly, solving problems is very important. We are endowed with intelligence to solve problems. So we have to solve problems in life. But by solving problems, yes, we do become strong. But that is not the end goal. The end goal is elevating the consciousness that is trapped in the material reality, where it is trapped in the body. So we are so body conscious that when it comes to unsolvable problems, we are completely lost. So therefore, when the consciousness is elevated, we keep solving problems that we can solve, and when there are unsolvable problems, we are not shaken. There are unsolvable problems in life: disease, aging, death. These will not shake one who has elevated one's consciousness from the material reality to the spiritual reality. So therefore, Karma Yoga Nishta is one who is on this pathway of elevating one's consciousness from where it is currently trapped at the base material reality to the spiritual reality, realizing that one is beyond the body, and therefore such a Karma Yoga Nishta is not deluded. Such a Karma Yoga Nishta does not have strong likes, does not have strong dislikes. Likes and dislikes are fine, but strong likes and strong dislikes can be very dangerous. A Karma Yoga Nishta therefore is so very balanced, not deluded, is very equanimous, and also knows that the pleasures of this world ultimately can only lead to sorrow. This is what Krishna, towards the end of the chapter, he says, Yehi samparshaja bhoga dukkhayonaya evate adi antavantah kaunteya nateshu ramate buddhaha. He says, Yehi samparshaja bhoga. Bhoga means pleasures. Yehi samparshaja bhoga. When the senses interact with the sense objects, the outcome, the pleasures that result out of this interaction, these pleasures only lead to sorrow, he says. Now we need to understand this a little bit more. Why Krishna says these pleasures, which are seemingly pleasures, lead to sorrow. Why? Because these pleasures, which are the outcomes of the interactions between the senses of the body and the sense objects of the world, these pleasures are subject to 5 defects, 5 doshas: arjana dosha, rakshana dosha, kshaya dosha, bhoga dosha, himsa dosha. Let's look at each of these. Arjana dosha. Dosha means defect. Arjana dosha. A lot of effort needs to be expended for the sake of these pleasures. And this is what happens in our life and living. We end up doing everything for the sake of becoming happy one day. One day I will be very happy. We postpone happiness. One day when I retire after 60 years, by which time body becomes so very weak, one day I will start to really enjoy and really experience happiness. Until then we are struggling. Every pleasure is so very fleeting. That is why it's arjana dosha. By design, these pleasures, there is so much of effort that needs to go in. So the outcome is so very disproportionate. It is so very disproportionate. And one lifetime is wasted for a very small fraction of fleeting happiness. That is why all these interactions are subject to the defect of arjana dosha. The second defect, rakshana dosha. Another big problem is I am always insecure. Anything I possess which I think gives me pleasure, I am also worried of losing it. Rakshana dosha. Anything and everything that I acquire, material acquisitions, I always have to protect. To that extent that I am also worried about rats. I am worried about insects. Because if simple things, I accumulate food, I have to protect it. Everything and anything. Now I need all kinds of sophisticated locks and key mechanisms to protect all the wealth I accumulate. Wherever I go, I am only thinking of what I have in my safe. Rakshana dosha. It gives me so much of anxiety all the time. So it always comes with this defect of rakshana, that also again ultimately is not possible, because everything only has a shelf life. Everything is so very fleeting. So in spite of expending so much effort to protect, I cannot, because it is subject to the law of fragility. The third dosha is arjana dosha, rakshana dosha, kshaya dosha. Everything is perishable. Kshaya means perishable. Everything perishes. Everything is subject to the law of change. So therefore, what pleases me today may not please me tomorrow. Kshaya, it's subject to the law of perishability. And also, even that pleasure is subject to the law of diminishing returns. Everything that my senses get satisfied is subject to the law of diminishing return. The same laddu gives me so much happiness. The first laddu. The second laddu, possibly the happiness is 70%. The third laddu, I start saying maybe I should stop. Fourth, I say no. Fifth, I run away. Law of diminishing. In spite of I loving it. Why? Because that is by design. Everything that is the outcome of the senses engaging with the sense objects is subject to Kshaya dosha, law of diminishing returns. Bhoga dosha. Bhoga dosha is when I fulfill the desire for indulgence, I think I am done with it, but then I realize I am only strengthening the desire. It is like adding fuel to the fire. Just because I indulge and I fulfill the desire does not mean that the desire says goodbye and it goes away. It only becomes stronger, and just like adding fuel to the fire, it starts to consume us. That this is bhoga dosha. So therefore, just by fulfilling a desire does not mean we can overcome the force of the desire. And then himsa dosha. When the desires overtake us, become so very powerful that knowingly or unknowingly we may end up causing harm to others for the sake of our indulgence. So any outcome which is the result of the engagement between the senses and the sense objects, they may be called pleasures, but Krishna says dukkayonaya evate. Adi antavanta kaunteya. Adi anta. Because anything which has a beginning and an end cannot be pleasure. Because what is pleasure now will become sorrow soon. That is the design. That is the design, and that is what the outcome of every engagement between the senses and the sense object is. Therefore, Krishna says the Karma Yoga Nishtha realizes this, and therefore he is able to stay clear of this by being a witness to this engagement of his senses with sense objects. He is not pulled apart by his own desires. And Krishna concludes the chapter by giving some very, very profound wisdom towards the end of 5th chapter, where he talks about how the Karma Yogi can bring a balance between destiny and responsibility. This is always a challenge for us. Balancing destiny. When we say destiny, typically destiny is what happens to us which we cannot change. The unchangeable. And responsibility is taking up and doing something and changing the changeable. This, in our life, there are things that we can change. There are things that we cannot change. And wisdom is to know the difference between the two. Change the changeable, accept the unchangeable, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Now, how do we balance this destiny and responsibility as a practitioner of Karma Yoga? Krishna, concluding the 5th chapter, gives a very important message. Hey Arjuna, know that I am the Sarvaloka Maheshwara. I am also Suhritam Sarvabhutanam. Suhrit means well-wisher. I am the best friend of not only your best friend, I am everybody's best friend here, Arjuna. Essentially what Krishna is saying, how when we bring Krishna into the equation of whatever we do, he is now slowly and steadily building the case where, now we are in the 5th chapter now. Still, he's not started talking about knowing Krishna. He's not still started talking about Bhakti Yoga, but he's slowly bringing the case of how a Karma Yoga Nishta can look at Krishna as his partner, and in that process balance destiny and responsibility. When I look at what is unchangeable, and there are so many things which are unchangeable in this world. In fact, the unchangeable in the world is more than what is changeable. The changeable in this world, the scope of my influence is so very little. But there is that little circle, if we were to look at it. Yes, I do have a small scope where I can change what is changeable. But there is a larger circle in this world, away beyond my scope of influence, which is unchangeable. Now, many a times when we look at the unchangeable, we make a conclusion that we are helpless. It becomes very defeatist. Now, when we understand Krishna as Sarvaloka Maheshwara and Suhritam Sarvabhutanam, then we can also look at what is unchangeable, and the unchangeable, which is the destiny, and understand that this is nothing but an inconceivable expression of Krishna's will. What is unchangeable is an expression of Krishna's will, and therefore he is Sarvaloka Maheshwara, he is Suhrit, he is my well-wisher. So whatever is unfolding has to be for my good, because he, after all, he is my ultimate well-wisher. So therefore I may not have any control on the unchangeable, but I very well know that the greatest well-wisher of mine, he is taking care of what is unfolding, and therefore it is in able hands. It is not in my hands, but it is being taken care of by somebody who has my interests, who is taking care of what is right for me, what is good for me. So therefore what is unchangeable becomes a good understanding of the expression of Krishna's will. Then the responsibility. Many times, when we look at taking responsibility for even things that are changeable, we look at the world and we see how bad this world is. We are all alone in this bad world and we are struggling. There are so many forces arrayed against us, even when we want to do something good. Even when we see that we have an iota of influence, but then even to exercise my will and bring about some change the changeable, we may look at the world and say how this is a big bad world and I am all alone. Now Krishna says, you are not alone at all. Recognize that everything that you do is in partnership. Suhritam Sarvabhutanam, I am there with you as your well-wisher. So suddenly we recognize that when we take responsibility, we are not alone. We are not alone, we are in partnership with Krishna. When a Karma Yogi recognizes this fundamental fact that Krishna is Sarvaloka Maheshwara, Suhridam Sarvabhutanam, then he is able to balance the destiny and the responsibility. And thus, Krishna concludes the 5th chapter primarily highlighting how such a Karma Yogi becomes fit to master his mind, and by mastering mind, one can stay connected with Krishna, and that leads into the topic of Dhyana Yoga, which is the 6th chapter, where Krishna spends a lot of time in terms of mastering the mind. Here in the 5th chapter, Krishna talks about the pathway to Atma Sakshatkara, realizing attaining self-realization. And we saw attaining self-realization. How do we gain self-realization? The mind has to become a mirror. How will the mind become a mirror? Krishna is going to talk about in detail on how the mind can be made into a faithful mirror, how it can actually reflect our true nature, how it can bring about complete alignment with who we think we are and who we are. And that is the reason 6th chapter is rightly titled Dhyana Yoga. Until then, let us continue to contemplate on the concluding message of Krishna. He is Sarvaloka Maheshwaram and he is Suhrutum Sarvabhutana. With this, we are empowered. We are empowered to do our duties in life, knowing that Krishna is in partnership with us, and what we think is unchangeable, what we think is going against us, is in good hands. He will do what is needed to ensure that we stay on course and we reach our eventual destination. Jai Sri Krishna. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanastu.